Hey, janitor, get in here and clean this up, right now. My father-in-law's voice cut through the boardroom, and the room burst into laughter. I was standing in the middle of his executive meeting, mop in hand, surrounded by people in suits who thought I didn't belong there. I'm Daniel, and in this company, his company, I was the janitor. At least, that's what everyone believed. Richard Hayes didn't just dislike me, he made a show of it. Every insult was louder when others were watching, every order sharper when his daughter, my wife, was in the room pretending not to hear. Careful, he added, smirking. Wouldn't want you messing up the only job you're qualified for. More laughter. I bent down, silent, like always. But then the CFO leaned over and whispered something to him, something that made Richard's expression shift instantly. And for the first time, he looked at me differently, like he just realized something was very, very wrong. Something in the room changed immediately. The CFO didn't say it out loud, he barely moved his lips, but Richard heard it clearly enough to stop smiling. "Sir, we need to verify something about the internal ownership records," the CFO said quietly, eyes flicking toward me for a fraction of a second. That glance wasn't casual, it was careful, like he was checking whether I was supposed to be there at all. Richard straightened in his chair, his smirk fading into something tighter. "Ownership records?" he repeated. "Why are you looking at him while you say that?" A few executives shifted uncomfortably. The room that had been laughing just seconds ago suddenly felt heavier, like the air itself had changed. I stayed on my knees, mop still in hand, but I wasn't cleaning anymore. I was listening, because I had seen that look before. That exact hesitation, that quiet fear when someone realizes a detail they were never supposed to question. My father-in-law, Richard Hayes, leaned forward slowly. His voice dropped. "Whatever this is, say it properly." The CFO swallowed. "There's been a discrepancy in the internal registry system. Recent updates don't align with the board's current understanding." Silence. One of the directors frowned harder, leaning toward his tablet like he suddenly needed proof. The CFO hesitated again, longer this time, then finally said, "Some of the majority ownership filings were changed months ago." My grip tightened on the mop handle. Richard let out a short laugh, but it didn't sound confident. "Changed? Without my approval? That's impossible." But the CFO didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me again. And that's when I slowly stood up, for the first time since I walked into that room. Richard's eyes followed me instantly. "What exactly are you not telling me?" he demanded. And in that moment, the entire boardroom waited for my response. But I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch just long enough for it to feel uncomfortable. Not for me, for them. The boardroom had completely shifted now. No laughter, no smirks, just 20 high-level executives staring between me, the CFO, and Richard like something hidden under the floorboards had finally started to crack open. Richard's voice sharpened. "Daniel, I asked you a question." I finally placed the mop against the table, slowly, deliberately. The small sound of it tapping the glass felt louder than anything else in the room. Then I looked at him. Not like a janitor, not like someone waiting for permission, just directly at him. "You keep saying impossible, but you haven't checked the system in months, have you?" A few people shifted again. One of the directors frowned harder, leaning toward his tablet like he suddenly needed proof. Richard's jaw tightened. "That system is controlled by my office." The CFO exhaled slowly. "It was updated through a private acquisition channel." That word hit the room differently. Acquisition. Richard stood up halfway now. "No one authorized any acquisition. I would know if—" "Would you?" I interrupted quietly. That stopped him. For the first time, Richard didn't have an immediate answer. His eyes locked onto mine, searching for something. Confidence, fear, weakness, anything he could use. But I didn't give him any of it. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket. The movement alone made two executives flinch. I pulled out a thin black folder and placed it on the table between us. No rush, no drama, just certainty. Richard stared at it like it didn't belong in his world. "What is that?" he asked, voice lower now. I slid it slightly forward and said the one thing he clearly wasn't ready to hear. Open it and you'll understand why I've been cleaning your floors for the last 3 months." His hand didn't move, but the CFO quietly added, "Sir, you might want to see this." And Richard finally reached for the folder. But the moment his fingers touched it, the boardroom door suddenly opened behind us. The door swung open hard enough to interrupt the moment completely. Everyone turned at once. A legal advisor from the compliance department stood there, slightly out of breath, holding a sealed document envelope in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Sorry for the interruption," she said quickly, but her eyes immediately locked on the black folder. That wasn't accidental. Richard slowly pulled his hand back from it, as if the folder had suddenly become dangerous. "What is going on here?" he snapped, voice rising again to regain control. "Why is compliance walking into my board meeting unannounced?" The woman didn't answer him right away. Instead, she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Click. That sound felt heavier than anything else in the room. "I was instructed to deliver this personally," she said, holding up the sealed envelope. Then she looked at the CFO, then at me, and finally at Richard. Due to a triggered internal audit verification, certain ownership and authorization records required immediate confirmation. A murmur spread through the table. Richard's face tightened. Triggered by who? No one answered fast enough. I did. "By me," I said calmly. That single word drained the room again. Richard let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You? A janitor triggered a corporate audit?" I didn't react, because I didn't need to. The compliance officer stepped forward and placed a sealed envelope directly beside the black folder. "This contains the verified ownership ledger as of the most recent legal update." Richard's eyes snapped to it instantly. "No, that's not possible." But his voice wasn't as strong anymore. The CFO finally spoke again, quietly. "Sir, the system shows a controlling stake was transferred through a private acquisition structure 3 months ago." Richard turned slowly toward him. "Whose structure?" Silence. Even the air felt frozen. The compliance officer answered instead. "It's registered under one name." She hesitated just long enough to make it hurt. Then she said it. "Daniel Carter." Richard's chair scraped back violently as he stood. "That's a lie!" But I was already watching him carefully now, because I hadn't even opened my folder yet, and what was inside it would finish the conversation entirely. Richard took a step back from the table. Just one, but it was the first time anyone in that room had ever seen him retreat. "That's not my company," he said sharply, pointing at the documents like they were offensive. "This is some kind of manipulation. Daniel doesn't own anything. He cleans floors." A few nervous laughs tried to form in the room, but they died immediately when no one else joined in. I opened the black folder, slowly. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted them to understand I had time. Inside were printed agreements, signed transfer documents, and verified bank confirmations, each page stamped, each signature validated through the legal network. The sound of paper turning felt louder than Richard's breathing. The compliance officer stepped closer, scanning the top page. Her expression changed instantly. "It's real," she said quietly. That was all she needed to say. Richard shook his head once. No, this is impossible. I would have been notified. You were notified," I interrupted. He stopped. I looked up at him now, fully. "You just didn't read the emails buried under the reports you never opened." A few nervous directors shifted uncomfortably. One of them lowered his gaze to his tablet, scrolling faster now. Richard turned toward them. "You're actually listening to him? He's a janitor." But nobody laughed this time. That silence hurt him more than any argument. The CFO cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, the acquisition structure bypassed standard visibility due to confidentiality clauses. It was legally permitted." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "By whom?" No one answered immediately, so I did. I said calmly. That word didn't just land, it hit. Richard stared at me like his brain refused to process it. "You don't have the authority," he said instantly. I closed the folder, and for the first time, I didn't sound like someone asking for permission. "I already took it," I said. A beat,
Then the compliance officer slowly added, almost reluctantly, "Legally, he did." Richard's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the edge of the table. "No, no, you don't understand what you just did." I took one step closer and lowered my voice just enough for only him to hear the next part. "Actually," I said, "I think I understand everything now." And his expression finally broke. Richard didn't sit down. He couldn't. He just stood there, frozen, like the floor beneath him had disappeared and he was waiting for someone to confirm gravity still existed. "That's illegal," he finally said, but it came out weaker than before. "You can't just walk in here and take control of a company you scrub floors in." A few nervous executives glanced at each other again, but no one stepped in to defend him this time, because the documents on the table weren't denying it anymore. They were confirming it. The compliance officer spoke again, carefully. "Sir, the acquisition was executed through a verified holding structure. Everything matches regulatory requirements." Richard turned sharply toward her. "Whose approval did you use?" She hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Then she answered quietly, "Board-level authorization, under controlling stake rights." Richard's face tightened. "That requires me." I shook my head slightly. "No, it requires whoever owns the majority." That line landed differently now. Slower. He finally looked at me again, not like a nuisance anymore, not like a janitor, but like something he should have studied before he ever opened his mouth around me. "You planned this," he said, voice low. I didn't deny it, because I had. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, while they all ignored me in hallways and meetings and elevators I cleaned without being noticed. Richard took a step forward. "So what now? You walk in here, embarrass me, and think you can just erase everything I built?" That was the first time his voice carried real emotion, anger mixed with fear. I looked around the room. Every executive was watching now, waiting. I turned back to him. "I'm not erasing anything," I said calmly. Then I paused. And that's the problem. Silence hit again. Richard frowned. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my pocket and placed a second document on the table. Different color, different seal. The compliance officer saw it first, and her eyes widened slightly. Richard noticed that reaction, and his voice dropped. "What is that?" I looked at him and said the words that finally changed everything. "This is the termination clause of your position." His face went still, and for the first time in the entire meeting, Richard Hayes didn't have a response. For a moment, nobody moved. Not Richard, not the board, not even the compliance officer. The word termination just hung in the air like it didn't belong in a room that once was his to control. Richard finally blinked, like he was forcing his brain to catch up. "My position," he repeated slowly. "You can't terminate me. I built this company." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You built a version of it. The rest was running without you for a long time." A few executives lowered their eyes again, this time not out of discomfort, but recognition. Richard turned sharply toward them. "Don't just sit there, say something." No one answered. That silence hit harder than anything I could have said. His jaw tightened again. "This is a coup, that's what this is." The compliance officer stepped in immediately. "Sir, everything here is within contractual governance. Majority ownership includes executive restructuring authority." Richard shook his head again, faster now. No, there are protections. There are clauses. There are..." He stopped mid-sentence because I slid another page forward. Just one, right to the center of the table. His eyes dropped to it, and I watched the exact moment he saw his own signature on a delegation clause he clearly never remembered agreeing to. His breathing changed. "You didn't read it," I said quietly. "You never read anything that already confirmed what you wanted to believe." That line finally landed. Not like an insult, like a verdict. Richard's voice dropped. "You were nothing when you came into this family." I nodded slightly. "Maybe. That's what you needed me to be." A long pause. Then I leaned forward just enough to make sure only he heard the next part clearly. "Actually," I said, "I think I understand everything now." And his expression finally broke. Then the CFO cleared his throat again, carefully. Sir, the board needs confirmation on immediate leadership transition protocols. Richard turned toward him, but before he could answer, I spoke first. Already initiated. And every screen in the room suddenly lit up with a single notification.